Over the past few years, there has been an erupting controversy over our monuments. In particular, progressives and activists have demanded that schools be renamed, statues removed, and historical narratives be revised. For example, the San Francisco School Board voted to rename 44 schools named after various historical figures, including George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. According to CNN, 73 Confederate monuments were removed or renamed in 2021. Additionally, the U.S. military has renamed a set of military forts, which were named after various Confederate war military heroes. This impulse has been undertaken with great urgency across the country. Meanwhile, one of our nation's most recognizable and great monuments, Mount Rushmore, has its own vulnerabilities and controversies, which leads us to today's discussion about the book, Monumental Controversies, Mount Rushmore, Four Presidents and the Quest for National Unity by esteemed historian and author Harriet, Senie. Fellow Patriots, I am Judge Michael Warren of the Oakland County, Michigan Circuit Court, a former member of the State Board of Education, co-founder of Patriot Week with my daughter Leah, and your host for this episode of Patriot Lessons. I'm also the author of America's Survival Guide and the host of Patriot Lessons, American History and Civics podcast. Today we are joined by Harriet Senie. Professor Senie's chief areas of research are public art, memorials, memory, and material culture. She is a professor emerita of art history at City College of New York. In fall of 2000, Professor Senie was appointed visiting distinguished professor at Carnegie Mellon University. She previously served as an associate director of the Princeton Art Museum and gallery director at Senie, Old Westbury. In 2008, with Professor Cher Cross-Knight, she co-founded Public Art Dialogue, an international organization that is also a College Art Association affiliate. Professor Senie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, it is our pleasure. So we'll cut right to the controversy. Why? Well, first, before the controversy, we'll start with why are monuments important at all?
That's a pretty broad question, very basic, certainly very important. Monuments are messages to the future from the present. Even though they are perceived as representations of the past, what they do is they mark our history in public spaces, and they may prompt dialogue about our most important historical issues. So their meaning, however, is not fixed, as your run-through just illustrated. They change their meaning through our use. So that's why we're dealing with these controversies right now, including the controversies pertaining to Mount Rushmore.
Professor Senie, your book thoroughly addresses the creation of Mount Rushmore. Can you tell us how it got started?
Yes, initially it was the idea of South Dakota State historian Don Robinson. What he wanted to do was increase tourism to the Black Hills. I mean, this is truly an example of beware of what you wish for, because the tourism around Mount Rushmore is staggering. But what he had in mind initially was something local, some local heroes, including some Native American chiefs, but the whole vision was expanded once he got in touch with Gutzon Borglum, who was nothing if not ambitious. So he conceived of this colossal monument as something honoring these four nationally renowned presidents. Borglum himself was a very problematic character, but nevertheless, his achievement at Mount Rushmore, if you'll excuse me, was truly monumental.
I like the play on words, Professor. So for those of us who haven't been there and actually haven't studied it, I know everybody is used to the four iconic sculptures and faces. Is that all there is? What can you tell us? What the monument?
Well, that's all there is today. Originally, and we should say it depicts Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt. That's not in everybody's mainframe immediately, but initially the figures were supposed to be half length. There was also supposed to be something like a historical museum in the back of the mountain, documenting all kinds of things pertaining to American history, but funds ran out and Borglum died, or perhaps not quite in that order.
So it's a partially completed monument, which still has the intended effect of driving a huge amount of tourism to the place. I understand that there's some. I don't want to. I'm not sure if you call them affiliated, but some other monuments or museums dedicated to the Native Americans that are within 17 miles or so of the site. Is that right?
There's one monument, Crazy Horse, that's in some proximity, but it's a very problematic work. It does have some affiliated educational institutions. It's problematic, first of all, to erect a memorial to a Native American, since their concept of that kind of attention is not ours. It's not the same as ours. Crazy Horse was noted to be an extremely private individual, and it's run now by a family of the sculptor who created it. It's still unfinished, and it's become kind of a cash cow for them. The federal government at one point offered to contribute to its support, but they turned it down because they were making too much money. So that's a problem. I wouldn't really include them in the same sentence. In the same sentence as Rushmore.
So Mount Rushmore is freestanding, independent, incompleted monument that has become a great resource of tourism. But what are the controversies surrounding Mount Rushmore?
Sure. And, if I might just interject a note to acknowledge the sculptural accomplishments, these heads are 60 feet high. 60. It took over 400 workers, and the sculptor worked on it from 1927 to 41, and his son finished it. But what are the controversies? The main controversy I don't know if it's the main controversy anymore. There are two significant controversies. One focuses on the fact that the land was stolen from the Lakota Sioux in violation of an 1868 treaty. There's no question about that. The UN has ruled on it, etc. The other controversy has to do with the 4 presidents who are depicted there and the fact that Washington and Jefferson owned slaves. Lincoln was responsible for the execution of a number of Native Americans, and Roosevelt was noted for his imperialistic policies. That said, I think first of all, each of those statements is complicated. I'm just giving you the straight narrative line. That said, when we think about things like this, I think it's critical to keep a kind of balancing scale. What are the accomplishments, in this case, of these 4 presidents weighed against the shift in values through which we see them now? That's not to say that I think that this other history shouldn't be acknowledged. I think it's very important that our monuments tell as complete a history as possible. It's just that right now, from the perspective of certain critics, because of these particular aspects of their presidencies and persons, there's a feeling that it should go. I don't think Mount Rushmore should come down, and I don't think it's ever going to come down.
The controversies are very similar to the critiques of the monuments of the, there's some criticism of the Lincoln Memorial. And there's obviously some serious criticism of Monticello, and I understand they've changed the academic program at Monticello, as well as some of the other Montpelier with James Madison. Is there any kind of educational programming that goes with Mount Rushmore? Like if you get a tour of Mount Vernon, you learn a lot about George Washington and the plantation, and the Key of the Bastille is there. But you said that originally the vision of Mount Rushmore was to have a museum, but that wasn't completed. So is there any kind of educational programming there right now?
Sure, you can take a tour, and there's a film. Now, I haven't been there recently enough to say what's included in those programs at this point in time. The films at the time that I was doing research for this book did not go into that at all. They talked about the accomplishment of building the monument. For a time, the head of Rushmore through the National Park Service was a Native American. And then if you took a tour walking around the site, you would certainly have heard about the Native American history. That individual is no longer the head, and I don't know to what extent the programs have changed. I would like to interject one note, though, about how do we change this going forward? In other words, what can we do to tell a more inclusive history? I think what we say at these monuments is critically important, but until our textbooks, starting with the younger grades, start to reflect a total picture, we're still going to have these sort of gaps, I would say, in public understanding.
Okay, very good. So your subtitle, I have a subtitle in my book, which is How to Stop America's Impending Suicide by Reclaiming Our Founding First Principles in History. Yours is, which is way too long.
I'll get in line with that.
Yeah, good. Yours is a little shorter than mine, but not much. Mount Rushmore, 4 Presidents, and the Quest for National Unity. Can you explain to me and to the audience what you mean by the Quest for National Unity and how Mount Rushmore plays into that?
Sure. George Washington was worried about national unity from the moment of his presidency. In fact, he made it a major focus of his 1796 campaign. I can read you what he said, but I don't know that we had that much time. So
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
We're all about primary documents, so that would be great.
Okay, great. So he said, properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, discountenancing whatever may suggest even a suspicion that it can in any event be abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. That's pretty direct. Thomas Jefferson made national unity a priority in his inaugural address as the 3rd President of the United States in 1801. He won a very, very, very contentious election. And what he said afterwards, I would say, is alarmingly relevant. He said, this now being decided by the voice of the nation, announced according to the rules of the Constitution, all will, of course, arrange themselves under the will of law and unite in common efforts for the common good. And he also talked about the importance of tolerating opposing views. He said, if there be any among us who wish to dissolve this union or to change its republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated, where reason is left free to combat it. As I said, alarmingly relevant. Lincoln, of course, fought a war to maintain the Union, and perhaps most famously, he said, the mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as they surely will be, by the better angels of our nature. So maintaining the Union was paramount for these 3 presidents. It was somewhat less of an issue for Roosevelt when he became president after the assassination of McKinley. But when he ran for the presidency on his own, his campaign button had the word unity written directly over his head. Obviously, this concern for unity, which is nothing if not critical today, has been there since our founding. I mean, some have questioned, perhaps rightly so, whether the United States were ever united.
Well, that's fascinating. A couple of other additions to what you pointed out. When Jefferson's first inaugural, he also stated, "We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. A difference in opinion is not a difference in principle." And I thought that also that it was very important, specific, reaching out across the aisle, so to speak. I'm not sure they called it that back then, but trying to unify folks. And Lincoln's "The House Divided" speech, which Sumner also had similar sentiments. House divided cannot stand. So those are fascinating insights with regard to the people that are represented. Do you think Mount Rushmore itself has helped unify the country at all?
I think it's both helped unify it among those who really champion those presidents and admire what they've done, but also increasingly divided it according to how one perceives it. I mean, particularly when one thinks about the fact that it is built on land that was stolen from Native Americans, theirs by right of a treaty. We only make treaties with independent nations, so that's what the Lakota Sioux were. And I think it also highlights, such a critical difference in the way Native Americans perceive land. They don't perceive it as being for sale. They perceive it as almost like a mother, something that nurtures us through food and medicinal herbs, etc. The notion of owning land and therefore selling it is totally anathema. And obviously, we view real estate, we Westerners view real estate in a radically different way. And I think that that really has an impact on how we see Mount Rushmore. I mean, the other thing to remember about Rushmore, which is not among the things that unifies people, is that it really was intended as a monument to expansion. That was the idea of its sculptor, Gutzon Borglum. There was no question he was written about that, and we have ample evidence that that's the fact. Well, Washington was very interested in expanding the country. He was a landowner himself. He had worked as a surveyor. Jefferson doubled the size of the country in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. Lincoln, arguably, by keeping it together, did considerable work towards at least maintaining the boundaries as they were. And Roosevelt expanded those boundaries overseas. Now, if we see it as a monument to expansion, especially initially the land that was taken by Washington and Jefferson from Native Americans, then I don't think that's something that's holding us together.
That's interesting. I'd also add to that Lincoln signed the Homestead Act back in 1862, which definitely encouraged Western migration by providing settlers about 160 acres of public land with it was designed specifically to help continue that manifest destiny. You also noted that there have been some presidential visits to Mount Rushmore. Some seem more, I don't want to say important, but some seem to be a little more sedate. Some seem to be a little bit more engaging. What do you think about the presidential visits to the actual monument?
I think they're just a really interesting manifestation of the various political uses that the monuments are put to, from the really spectacular display. I'm not drawing a blank on that part of the book, with, a parade, music, etc.
I think that was Coolidge, right? When they started.
Right, and also later on, and then of course Trump indicating that he thought he should be included in Mount Rushmore, and Clinton spending very little time there, but making a point of visiting a local Native reservation, tells us a lot about the presidents. It doesn't tell us very much about Mount Rushmore, except that monuments can be used in various ways with, diametrically opposed content, if you will. I mean, even if we think about the Lincoln Memorial for a moment, that began celebrating Lincoln as the person who united the states, kept the Union together, no mention of slavery. There was concern that the Southern states would not approve building it if that were the case. And then gradually, over time, through Marian Anderson singing on the steps, Martin Luther's famous I Have a Dream speech, and even Barack Obama visiting there a few days after he was elected, gradually the meaning of that memorial has changed, I think, in public perception.
Well, as Faulkner said, The past is never dead. Um, it always continues
Yeah.
based on the changes of current current circumstances. You said earlier that you think that Mount Rushmore is not going to be. You thought it should stay and it shouldn't be taken down. Is there really a movement right now to actually like blow it up or change
No,
it? Or
no, there have been, over time, starting in the 70s, there were some demonstrations by Native Americans at the site, but there was not any damage, and I think nothing serious. I mean, I think it's more hyperbole when people say we should blow it up and, take it down, what have you. I mean, it may reflect accurately how they're feeling, but I don't think anybody would even attempt to do that. Um, Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine what that would all cause. But there's something also that sometimes we talk a lot about, and you gave some really good examples of memorials to say Washington and Lincoln that may have been removed. Sometimes it's really a pragmatic issue. Also, when I was in New York, the mayoral commission to consider some controversial memorials we had here in New York after the Charlottesville uprising in 2017, one of the things we had to think about is how would you eliminate all references to, say, Columbus, even in New York? Columbus Avenue, Columbia University, George Washington, are we going to rename the bridge? I mean, some of these things become even, as I said, from a purely pragmatic point of view, almost insurmountable.
Yes, that's right. They're entrenched, and if we decided that Madison or Jefferson had to go, we would have to rename half of the streets in the country, I think. So I lived on a Madison Street. There's a Madison Street,
and we've got Madison Avenue in New York, right?
Yes, right, exactly. So it would be quite an effort. So Patriot Lessons and this program and Patriot Week in general focuses very strongly on the Declaration of Independence and our founding first principles, the rule of law, unalienable rights, limited government, the social compact, equality, and the right to alter or abolish an oppressive government. Those are from the Declaration of Independence in the second paragraph. Do you think there's anything from that folks could learn about those first principles from your book?
That they're being radically threatened today. I think that is something that was very, very concerning to me. And also, one of the things that I was not aware of when I began doing the research for this book, that the sense in which we perceive all men are created equal, and of course, men, we know that's exclusive, was not what Jefferson meant. He really meant that men are created equal in their emotional capacity. It was Lincoln during the Civil War who changed the meaning of that principle to how we understand it today, and what we wish to think means all people are created equal. But I think we have a long way to go. And I think, at least I hope, one of the lessons of the book might be that these presidents changed their views over time, which was really, really interesting to me. This is something that's not in the book. I wish it had been. But Theodore Roosevelt, on one of his hunting trips after his presidency, when he visited the country of Uganda in Africa, he was totally surprised by how democratic it was and how long it had been democratic. In fact, the movie, what's the name of the movie that had the country Uganda in it, was based on Uganda. And what he intended to do when he came back and ran for president again was make equality for Blacks a basic foundation of his campaign, and something that he felt committed to realize. Unfortunately, he didn't win, and Woodrow Wilson did. But the point that
he was a real racist, right?
Oh my goodness!
Yes,
seriously.
Yes.
Good thing he's not on Mount Rushmore, right?
Right.
But seriously, I do feel all of these presidents evolved in their thinking over time. That's important. You know, we can pinpoint them at any historical moment and say, okay, they said this and they felt this. But if we take a look at the trajectory, they all evolved over time, most of them in a better direction. And so can we.
Well, thank you. I did want to make sure we show folks the book. Oops, sorry. Monumental Controversies. You can see the Mount Rushmore's right there. And what I really found fascinating, among other things, is that there are different, there you go. There's different, for example, this log cabin is dedicated to, is that really Abe Lincoln's log cabin where he was born? Is it a replica? Can you tell me about that?
That is the most hilarious monument I came across
in
all my research, not just for this book, but for any book. So some entrepreneur from New York thought it would be a good idea to recreate the cabin, and I'm already saying recreate, the log cabin that Lincoln lived in as a tourist attraction. But his log cabin was gone. So they got some logs from a nearby cabin and built something that looked a lot like it. And then this went on a traveling display. Each place it stopped, it would gather tourists, etc. At one point, it was exhibited near the recreated cabin of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. So they were, nearby, whatever. All the logs then get loaded. I'm giving you the short version. All the logs get loaded into a truck, carried back to New York, at which point they become intermingled. So now we have inauthentic logs allegedly belonging to the home of Lincoln and Jefferson Davis, all mixed up together. They take these logs and they rebuild another cabin, send it to Hodgenville, Kentucky, which is what you were showing in that image just before. And this becomes a memorial around which they build a neoclassical temple. But the temple itself has to be enlarged because the original dimensions now are twice as large as a log cabin might have been. So what you were just showing a moment ago, you've got this totally recreated log cabin in this neoclassical temple, and it is still visited by hundreds of thousands of people every day as if it were authentic. It took years and years for the true story to come out. But even when that was conveyed in public information at the site, it doesn't seem to have detracted from visitorships. So what can we say, right?
True American ingenuity. Well, Professor Senie, I want to thank you for your time. This has been a very interesting discussion. Again, the book is Monumental Controversies about Mount Rushmore. And hopefully our viewers will have the opportunity to learn more. And hopefully it's informed and illuminated our viewers' thinking on the importance of Mount Rushmore, the presidents represented there in the broader context of American history, and how to address the controversies surrounding monuments in general. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to establish new government, laying its foundation such principles and organized power such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Those words from the Declaration of Independence were revolutionary in 1776 and they remain revolutionary today. And it's our obligation as free citizens to live up to those first principles of unalienable rights, limited government, the social compact, equality, and the right to alter or abolish an oppressive government for ourselves and for future generations. And the place of monuments is obviously incredibly important in connection with trying to maintain those freedoms and liberty. And that's what America is all about, as well as Patriot Week. And please join us at Patriot Week at patriotweek.org and the Patriot Week YouTube channel. We also have a podcast, Patriot Lessons, American History and Civics. And don't forget my book, America's Survival Guide. Until next time, God bless you and God bless America.